All righty, welcome. I'm Randy Cross, and this is Unsafe Spaces. Want to thank you for joining us. Season 3, Episode 10. Been a good season so far. Today's episode, we'll have plenty of sports, one real good feel-good story, a little bit of a Wahmbulance that has something to do with my own personal butt hurtness. And we've got a great guest today. Rejoining us, she's been with us before, is Brittany Huges from MRCTV. She's a lot of fun to talk to. It's very topical on a lot of the things that have been going on in our world, and not just in our sports world in general. But here's a little taste, in case you forgot who Brittany is, of some of her stuff.
At the same moment that Senate Democrats were busy grilling Kavanaugh over his drinking habits back in college, liberal Twitter was mocking Donald Trump for drinking Diet Coke instead of red wine during a UN meeting. Doesn't matter that the president has repeatedly said he hasn't had a drink since his brother died from alcoholism at 43. Hey, let's make fun of him for it instead. Funny how that works. See, if you don't drink, or if you say that sex should be saved for marriage, you're a religious nut job. Until you're a conservative who gets nominated for the Supreme Court. Then they'll comb through your old yearbooks looking for clues that you ever did one too many tequila shots and demanding to know every sordid detail about your bedroom life. And if they can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you ran a gang rape ring with a bunch of your 16-year-old buddies and not a single adult ever found out, they'll just set that aside and get you for the crime of playing beer pong while being a wealthy white male.
So that's Brittany Huges. Obviously, she gets a little bit fired up about certain things, but we'll talk about some more topical things that's gone on in our world over the course of the last week or so. But first here, as we get going, will be my commentary. A book came out about a week ago. In fact, it was last Monday, I believe. It's called Brainwashed, written by former NFL player Brittany Huges. And his co-author is a researcher, Peter Cummings, MD. And it basically attacked Boston University, Concussion Legacy Foundation, and specifically Dr. Ann McKee, who is one of the leading neuropathologists, especially when it comes to studying CTE. They, being the authors, had a bit of an axe to grind. Now, you know who Brittany Huges is. He played football, had to retire because of concussions, ironically. Now, Peter Cummings, the doctor, also an author. You may know him from his best-selling book, The Neuropathology of Zombies, or maybe you didn't hear about that one. But in this book, which I have read, it's a hit job on specifically that place. And in just honesty here, Concussion Legacy Foundation in Boston U is where I donated my brain around the weekend of Super Bowl 51 about a year and a half ago. And I did it for a lot of basic reasons. And actually, some of the reasons that I donated my brain are some of the things that come up in this book. And that is the history of sort of lying that any of these connections ever existed. I agree with that. And the whole delay, deny, and hope they die approach that the NFL has taken when it comes to a lot of their former players. Don't even think about getting me started on some other stuff, which I'll mention here in a little bit. But I just want to mention specifically this book, in case you do buy it and pay the $9.99, is really literally a hit job on Boston U, on Concussion Legacy Foundation, and on Dr. Ann McKee, charging them as basically being the thugs of the CTE world, that they basically rule it, and anybody else that doesn't agree with them doesn't have a voice. I don't agree. I've spent time with these people. I've also looked at their research, and I come away with a completely different opinion because, let's be honest, we got to look at this simply. If it's been proven, and it has been proven, that repetitive blows to the head, to the brain, is not good for you. Doesn't take a lot to win that argument, does it? I mean, do we agree on that? Well, if it's not good for an adult, how in the world could it possibly be good for a kid? So part of what, and it's got nothing to do with who they're coached by and how they're coached. And that's another subject, because that is just grossly inadequate in specifically how they are coached. But kids 5, 6 to 14 really don't need to be taking all these hits to the brain. For one other overbearing reason, that we really don't absolutely know about this. So why expose children to this type of a problem? I've long been a proponent, especially since my association with Chris Nowinski and Concussion Legacy Foundation and studying the subject as I have. I don't think anybody should play contact full padded football until about 8th or 9th grade. So about 14 years old. Is that unreasonable? It's out there because people go crazy about it. But I don't think it is something that we have to really argue about. We have to figure this thing out. And we've got to protect the kids. And we've got to protect the players. You know what? I donated my brain for a very simple reason. I didn't get the choice of making an informed decision. I didn't know how bad it was. These kids, today's players have to know, and they're doing a great job with the concussion protocol. They're trying to do all they can to take certain kinds of hits out of the game and try to protect players from this type of a fate down the road. It is not 100%. It's not even 50%. Let's just say it's 1% of people that play and get repetitive brain injuries end up with some form of neurodegenerative disease. 1%. Well, it was 1/10 of 1% that led to the regulation of things like, cigarettes, etc., and getting the government involved in that. So let's quiet down a lot of this stuff. If you want to read this book, Brainwashed, go ahead and read it. I think, for me personally, I believe it's purely fictional. And it's purely an opinion piece, which is fine. And it's purely a hit job, which is also fine because that's your right. And this goes back into the freedom of speech. God bless you. You want to do it? Great. But that's all I got to say. All right, we're joined now, as promised, by Brittany Huges, who's a host and commentator at MRCTV. Does a lot of great work there. You saw a little piece of a sample of her work earlier as we were promoting her being a guest on the show. Brittany, welcome.
Thanks so much, Randy. Glad to be here. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been. It has been. And congratulations for the move back into the Eastern time zone.
Thank you. You know, California, actually San Diego was a pretty nice area, I got to say, but won't miss the state in general. Let's just put it that way. We got out before the dreaded water tax, so I'm good.
Oh, there you go. In fact, we were just talking about in the sports section, or we're going to talk about in the sports section, I should say, Notre Dame and Navy. And I know a lot of people, the eyebrows kind of lift when they say Notre Dame and Navy are playing in San Diego, but San Diego's got a significant military presence, but especially a Navy presence.
Oh, my goodness, it's huge. We've got 3 or 4 different bases. We were a little closer to the coast, but absolutely beautiful place. I will say I won't miss the state. I will miss the weather. You cannot beat that weather. It was perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, the main reasons I wanted to talk to you was sort of the reactions we've seen in general to just a whole bevy of stories. It would be one thing to be talking about the midterms, where the reactions from both sides have been, I'm losing my mind over here, and no, I can lose my mind more over here. But then you add on to that the mail bombs story out of South Florida, as it turned out, and then that horrendous event in Pittsburgh in the synagogue and the killing of 11 people happens. And Is there anything that can possibly happen from a news standpoint that doesn't immediately get spun in either direction to the Republican side or the conservative side or the liberal side? I mean, it's pretty frustrating as just kind of an average American.
It very much is, and I think that this is, this is a really sad commentary on where we have devolved to in general, and a lot of it is fueled by the media. I mean, I was commenting last week, even before the tragedy over the weekend at the synagogue, which is just, horrific beyond description. But with the mail bomber or the potential mail, but you can't call somebody a bomber if they didn't actually blow something up. So we'll call him the attempted mail bomber or whatever. And I was actually commenting to my husband. I was like, CNN hasn't talked about anything but this. It's like there's nothing going on in the entire world other than this. And so I think a lot of what you see, a lot of the reaction, a lot of the spin is fueled by the media and fueled by social media, people's ability to react to things before they even get information. And I think that it's not indicative of the average American. I do think it's indicative of our current political climate, though, that it's, and I hesitate to say this because I don't think most people feel this way, or at least I hope they don't, but it seems like whenever there's a tragedy, both sides almost get excited that they might be able to blame the other side for it.
Yep.
And they wait for information to come out to figure out, okay, well, who was it and what was their political affiliation? And then as soon as it comes out, one side points at the other and goes, I got you. That's horrible.
Yeah.
That's an absolutely horrible way to look at things like this. And look, the media doesn't do us or themselves any favors. This is something that we study and we monitor very much at the Media Research Center. The angle that they tend to report stories, it's no longer just, hey, this happened, here's the news, think what you will of it. It's spin. So, of course, as soon as people started getting these packages in the mail, and before we even knew whether they were actual explosive devices, who had sent them, no information was known except, hey, some padded envelopes came in the mail, something that kind of looked like a bomb was in it, we're investigating. That's all the information that had come out. And pundits were still rushing to blame Donald Trump for escalating political violence. Like the entire thing was completely and totally his fault, for perpetuating, violent rhetoric, or, their favorite phrase now is dog whistling to people, and completely ignoring the fact that you've got people on the left, i.e. Eric Holder, Maxine Waters, people on the left who have actually openly called for public harassment and violence. And so I think you see it on both sides. If you're looking for it, you can find it on both sides. But let's not pretend like Donald Trump is just out there, stirring up a whole bunch of rhetoric. That's what the left does every single day.
Yeah.
It's what the liberal media does every single day. You really think it helps to run around calling 63 million Trump voters Nazis? And you think that tones down rhetoric? You think that doesn't...
Hey, wait, Brittany, let me ask you, in reference to sort of the constant, well, this is hate speech, and this is hate speech, and this is hate speech, the rallies that President Trump has been doing for the midterms for candidates all over the country it'd be hard pressed to find a more triggering style of event for people that don't agree with him. The fact that they've got to see these things, and these things are out there, and his speeches are out there. How much of that is just as much of a triggering event as anything that comes that sets people that are of the more conservative ilk off?
Well, and I think it kind of, unfortunately, and I hate to say this, but it does kind of depend on how you look at it. Look, I have never been, and I've long since said this, I have never been a fan of, a lot of the things, not just a lot of the things that Trump says, but maybe more so the way that he says them, okay? His sort of Trumpian way of talking, which does tend to resonate with a lot of people, and I understand that. They like a president that, says what they're thinking and doesn't sound all high and mighty and political, and I get that, I do, but there are times where, a more presidential tone and being careful what you say would definitely be appreciated and called for. At the same time, there are many times, and we've seen this time and time and time again, where he says something, and that one 10, 15-second soundbite out of a 45-minute speech gets twisted and taken by the left, and they run with it in a totally different direction. For example, when he said over the weekend, he pointed out that armed guards are often very effective at stopping terrorists and stopping people with guns getting in and murdering a whole bunch of people. That
Right.
is true. We have seen that armed guards are effective at deterring and stopping these kinds of events. Well, of course, the Washington Post immediately runs with that as, he's blaming Jews for attacks against their own communities. He's like Hitler. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So you're going to find what you want to find if you're just going to, grab little bits and pieces out of his speech and run with that. When he said that, he's a nationalist. Well, if you look at the definition of nationalism, it simply means that you promote the interests of your country over everybody else's. You're concerned about what's happening within your borders.
Not if you're reading out of a different dictionary.
Not if you're reading out of a different dictionary. But if you look back at history, Teddy Roosevelt used the word nationalism
Right.
all the time. So, again, you're going to take it the way that you want to take it. And, I think right now we no longer look at things as, okay, here's what somebody meant. We look at it as, okay, how can we use this as a political weapon to make our point and to demonize somebody? And I think that's what happens over and over again. People get stirred up, people get emotional, then something bad happens, and everybody freaks out irrationally before they even have information.
I've got a question that's got nothing to do per se with politics or any of this, but I find myself just mad at times during the day that I can mitigate that by getting away from social media, by getting away from reading news stories, by just sort of escaping to a degree. Do you think I'm unusual in that, or is that a natural human reaction to the bombardment that we get, not only in social media, but in all forms of the media? Because it's not just liberal media. It's also conservative media is just as bad of pounding you between the eyes with stuff that just sort of torques you off.
Well, and that's why I always tell people that if you're looking for truth, unfortunately these days you don't have very many completely unbiased places to turn to. So I always say, look at some left-wing sources, look at some right-wing sources. A lot of times the actual truth lies somewhere in the middle. At the same time, I think that what you're saying about getting away from everything is a perfectly normal reaction. I think that's where the majority of Americans live. Look, people like me who spend much of our lives, because of what I do for a living, spend much of our lives on Twitter, listening to pundits on both sides. We tend to get, I think, an unrealistic picture and sometimes have to remind ourselves, look, the average American wakes up in the morning, eats their bowl of Wheaties, and goes to work. And they take care of their families, and they're worried about putting their kids through college and paying their mortgage. That's the vast majority of Americans. And I think they get sick of this. They get just so sick and tired of it. I spent the last 3 weeks pretty much away from work. Wrote a little bit, but we were in the middle of a cross-country move, which took a while.
Yeah.
And we drove across the country. We got in our car with a whole bunch of our stuff and made the drive across the country. And it's an absolutely, if you've never done it, by the way, I highly recommend it.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely beautiful country from coast to coast. And you know what? I barely checked social media for a couple of weeks. And it was one of the most free feelings I think I have felt in a long time. It feels like a detox. It really, really does. It feels like a detox. And look, I believe in staying informed, particularly in an election year. I believe in knowing what's going on. It doesn't do you any good to bury your head in the sand and just not pay attention. But you have to do so in moderation. You can't allow it to make you angry at, your spouse, your neighbor, who you go to church with.
Mm-hmm.
When you start to become bitter against your fellow American, and I think that's something I'm seeing on both sides. People are, starting to itch for a fight rather than just accept that political fights happen. Now they want them. And I think it's starting to make us really bitter against one another. And that becomes very dangerous. So if you're finding yourself in that place, step away.
Yeah.
I
do.
Just go take a picnic or something. I don't know. Do something.
Well, that's one of the great things about being around sports. I can just be around sports and largely get away from a lot of that. Hey, we're getting ready in another week or so for these midterm elections. No matter which party you're either a part of or planning to vote for, or if you're, an independent or whatnot, can you just a few words on the importance of actually using that valuable tool which is voting?
Absolutely. I would say two things about it. First of all, and we've said time and time again, you've heard it said that voting is your civic duty. This is something that, people in other countries have fought and died for this right. Not everybody gets this. This is something that we take for granted because we're so used to it just being our right. And in many countries, that's not the way that it is. And even if they do have the right to vote, elections are so rigged that it doesn't even matter. I mean, look down at Venezuela.
Right.
So, I always say that people should vote, but I add a caveat to that. Vote because you're informed, not simply because it's your right to do so. It's an important right, but it's also a very important responsibility to make sure that you're educated on issues and you know where you stand, instead of just voting for somebody because they've got a certain letter next to their name or because that's who's been in office in your district for the last 15 years or whatever. Make sure that you inform yourself from multiple sources and really truly understand where somebody stands, then go vote. That really is how voting should be done in this country, is with an informed electorate. And that's something I think we need to start getting back to and emphasizing.
Those are some sage words of advice, Brittany. Thank you so much for joining us, and welcome back to the Eastern Time Zone.
Thanks so much, Randy. Talk soon.
All righty. Bye-bye. All righty. Thank you so much to Brittany. Glad you joined us, and thank you for your time. Just a little something to think about, as always. Time now for Unsafe Spaces Sports. All right, number one on the list for Unsafe Spaces Sports. This is going to be a football-heavy deal here. We're going to start in the world of college football and some of the top scores from this past weekend. And there were some great scores and a lot of scoring. Seemed like all the big games had about 50 points scored. It was bizarre. When I say 50 points, I mean by one of the teams. But let's start things off with the number 2 team in the country. That was in action. Alabama was off. So Clemson went to Florida State. They're in Tallahassee. 59-10. What in the hell is wrong with Florida State? Where do you want to start? Well, that was a good place to start, and that tells you where they're at. All right, next up on the list, score-wise, is Notre Dame played Navy in San Diego. Yeah, that's kind of a geographic thing. Annapolis is where Navy is. South Bend, Indiana is where Notre Dame is. But if you're not familiar with this rivalry, it goes way, way back. And they do travel. They're going to be in 2020. They're going to be in Ireland. They've played this game all over the country, and this one is in San Diego and was dominated by Notre Dame, who's having a pretty good season, but again hasn't really played that much in the way of a tough competition. Unlike what we saw their original schedule, what it was like, it's not very tough. Next up, after Notre Dame, is Georgia. Georgia and Florida, great rivalry year in and year out. And Georgia dominated this one 36-17. That was fun to see. It really was, especially now Kentucky and Georgia. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Next up, after Georgia, and that game was the University of Kentucky's big comeback against Missouri. 15-14, they lost. Man, was that fun. Congratulations to Coach Stoops and the Wildcats. And they've got a big game coming up this weekend against the Bulldogs. Next up in the college world, score-wise, is University of Houston played USF. Houston went in at 6-1. USF went in at 7-0. UH comes out 7-1, and USF is now 7-1. And if you haven't had a chance to see De'Aaron King, the quarterback for Houston, check this kid out. This kid is sick. He is good. He throws the ball really well, and he can run like crazy. All right. Next up, this weekend. Check out these games. They're both going to be on CBS. The night game is going to be Alabama at LSU. That will be an incredible contest. Just incredible. The number one team and probably the number 3 team once these polls are released. What more can you say? This will be probably the game of the year matchup-wise, or at least until Ohio State and Michigan meet in the next to last weekend. And the other game that I've already mentioned is Georgia and Kentucky, and that also will be on CBS at 3:30. Check that out. This is going to be fun, and we'll see what Kirby Smart and the Bulldogs learned after that Florida win. Which one is the real Georgia? Is it the one that went toes up against LSU, or the one that stood up and balled out against Florida? Kentucky's consistent. Good defense, running the ball, not real flashy. And it's in Lexington, so it won't be easy for the Bulldogs. All right, that'll do it for the college football side. What do you say we just look at a few scores here on the pro side? And what went on Sunday in the NFL? It was light on action at times, but heavy on drama. Good example, the Jets, who's not a bad team. They lost to the Chicago Bears 24-10. Mitch Trubisky for Chicago is turning out to be one heck of a young quarterback, though you don't hear much about him outside of the city of Chicago, it seems, at times. Next up was a game that was much anticipated because of the quarterback for Kansas City, Patrick Mahomes. He didn't disappoint. Denver almost pulls it off, but Kansas City is having a very, very special season. And nobody that's a Chief fan wants to hear about past problems of having unbelievable regular seasons and going away in the playoffs. That's the past. That's history. Until you prove in January that that's just how you play. No, sorry. Next up on the NFL side is Pittsburgh and Cleveland. Cleveland came into this game thinking they had Pittsburgh's number, and the numbers, as you can see, didn't work out real well for the Cleveland Browns. They're going to be good someday, but as of right now, Ben Roethlisberger and Connor, great story. The running back out of Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh, is having a dreamlike first year for the Steelers. And the Browns at times just sort of play like the Browns. All right, next up is Packers and Rams. How about this? If you saw this one, it was exciting. The Rams pulled off the win 29-27. Aaron Rodgers and the Packers had to be extremely frustrated after losing this one. A lot of great stories around this, but the real story here is the Rams more than anything else. They are that good. It'll be fun to see how they go through the rest of their year, but you know, if you look at especially Gurley and that offense and that offensive line and those receivers, you've got Goff at quarterback. It's McVay has got it going on in LA, and they're sort of the darlings right now of LA. But I'll get to you, LA, in a second. All right. And next up on the list of games is that Rams-Saints game. Saints and Vikings. Drew Brees threw his first interception. I guess that was the most memorable thing after about 240 passes without one. He threw an interception in this game, but the Vikings didn't have enough to challenge the Saints. The Saints are a good team. They're a very good team. And anytime you got Drew Brees and as accurate as he is, you've got a great chance. All right, and just to finish up Unsafe Spaces Sports, something completely off the field. And when something bad happens off the field, you got to talk about it. Jacksonville Jaguars, and specifically Barry Church, Ronnie Harrison, DJ Hayden, and Gerard Wilson. 4 Jaguar players that were detained, not charged, but detained because of a scuffle at a bar/nightclub in London over a $64,000 bar tab. A $64,000 bar tab. Now, I'm not going to mention that they had a game in London this weekend on Sunday. This is late Friday night / Saturday morning. So it's not like the night before the game, but it's like right before the night before the game. Bad look for the league, bad look for the Jaguars. And when you're in a nightclub and they start bringing you bottles that you didn't order, hello, you're going to get charged for them. And you're going to say, I just can't tell you what a bad look this is. For the league, for the Jaguars, just in general, just don't go there. Easiest thing, don't go there. The club's name was Reign, R-E-I-G-N. It's kind of a fantasy / I don't know how to describe it. Seen the pictures. We've all been probably in these places. But bottle service, being young, and paying over $4,000 a bottle is going to run up a bill. So figure it out. That's a terrible look for the NFL. And I imagine they'll do something about this, but not too distinctive, that's for sure. All right, there you go. That's Unsafe Spaces Sports. Time now for the Wahmbulance and the butthurt I referenced earlier. I've mentioned in the past that I'm a Dodger fan. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan specifically. But, you know, we lived in Brooklyn. I was a Dodger fan as a baby. We moved to L.A. I stayed a Dodger fan. Always will be. Not a happy camper. The 18-inning game that they finally won on a walk-off homer by Muncy was the highlight of the World Series for me. Other than that, they got out strategized, they got out pitched, they got out hit, they got out everything by the Boston Red Sox. The Red Sox won 108 games. Their closer, Craig Kimbrell, all you local fans here in Atlanta, remember Craig? Well, he gets himself another World Series ring. This is an amazing Red Sox baseball team. Might be the best team that the Red Sox have ever had. And it wasn't even close. And you know what? That sort of twists my knickers a little bit because I wanted the Dodgers to at least put up a fight. Just a little bit, please. Ugh, God. Again. Make it worse. San Francisco sends a tweet out for, congratulations on your World Series appearance. Huh? Like appearing in a World Series is the goal. No, it's to win it. Thanks for the joke. That'll do it. All right, let's go right now to our feel-good story of the week, which you're going to love. I'm on top of the world, 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 I'm on top of the world. Yeah, our feel-good story of the week comes via Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. A fabulous organization here in Atlanta, does a lot of great work for the various children's maladies and helping out parents as their children suffer through various crises. But this specifically is about an older gentleman by the name of David Deutschman and how he pitches in and what he does as his idea of just finding a way to help. And it involves something as simple as just holding a baby.
You want this? You want to try that? Huh? See that? Are you my friend now? Are we going to be buddies? You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. some of my guy friends asked me what I do here, and I told them, well, I hold babies. Sometimes I get puked on, I get peed on. It's great. And they say, well, why would you do that? And, they just don't get it, the kind of reward you can get from holding a baby like this. It's been wonderful because it gives me something to do that has meaning to it. Every day I drive in here, I don't know which kids and parents I'm going to meet and what the issues will be and how can I help. And, you know, it's been wonderful for me.
What great stuff. Thank you, David, and thank you to Children's Healthcare of Atlanta for that fabulous story. That doesn't make you feel good, I don't know what will. All right, I want to remind you how you find this podcast. You go to unsafespacesUSA.com. You go to randycross.com. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're pretty much everywhere, and we are accessible. Thank you for watching, and time now for a very special Happy Trails.
Happy trails until we meet again. Who cares about the cloud when we're together? Just sing a song and think about sunny weather. Happy trails till we meet again.